Hello, and welcome to another episode of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. I hope you've all had a fantastic week. Don't really have much to report this week. We're sort of getting back to normal. Studio's still very busy, and that's that. My kids are going back to childminders and school they'll be there now. I'm recording this early. So that is a huge relief and takes the pressure off summer childcare issues, which is usually what the summer is about. But anyway, here we go. So we'll just dive straight in with part 2 of my conversation with Andy Pickering. Here we go. So your Marantz was your first machine that you'd bought?
Yeah. So I've never owned any other 4-track. I've actually got 2 of them now. But it's only a recent thing that I've built the studio up to what it is now with the outboard and the mixing desk and things like that. Before, let's say, a year ago, I'd still only really got a decent mic, a 4-track, and some monitors. And that's about it. I've here and there owned a couple of preamps and things that I've sort of bought and sold. But other than that, yeah. If anyone's seen any pictures of my studio now, this is all pretty recent, like since the last lockdown, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I know that lockdown has had a huge effect on this, but prices are just going astronomical, aren't they, at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I bought the Marantz 10 years ago. Well, 2010, so 11. For £60, and it was like boxed, and clearly whoever bought that in the 90s, I think it's from 93, that particular model, it never been used. So it gave me like 10 years of perfect. I mean, I had to change a belt after a couple of years, but other than that, like, so, and now, like, I've got, I don't know how much one of those would be worth working now, but probably 400-500 quid.
I think I saw your exact machine for sale on Reverb for about that. It might have been above 500. And I just bought this Tascam 244 for 350, and that's fully serviced.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, I felt lucky getting it for 350, and I know that the Revox that I bought sort of almost 2 years ago now, that again they're almost double in price. It's insane how quickly it's become as popular.
I know, it's scary, but I guess if you get these things and there's only a certain amount made, and then of that there's an equation where there's probably 50% of them are working well, and then you start to, the supply and demand just starts to go through the roof.
Do you think what do you think is the reason for all of this? Why do you think it's happening? I mean, obviously lockdown will have had an effect because everybody's doing stuff at home, but why when it's so easy to record, I'm recording this interview on a Focusrite Scarlett and it's that's fine. So what do you think it is that people are sort of harking back to this stuff for?
Yeah, I think it's just the complete freedom without the computer screen is a big one. Recording with a computer screen, recording with your eyes and all that sort of stuff, I think gives people a certain air of freedom to shut the computer down, plug a guitar into a 4-track, and you just record it, and then you just play it back. It's like the most simplistic thing ever, but there's something about that experience, taking it away from staring at a waveform and going, oh, what plugin can I add to that and to make it sound really good? Something just more honest and natural about that is, I think, what's attracting people. There's obviously a huge sort of lo-fi scene. Mac DeMarco is like the sort of forefront of that for like younger people, maybe 10 years younger than I am. He's like their sort of guru, and he's like pure sort of analog focused and makes this kind of lo-fi sound with analog gear, and then that's probably making people go, I want that sound, I want to be able to do that. So he's definitely a reason of people that I know that are 10 years younger than me in their sort of mid-20s of why they would want to get that sound. That's just one instance, but yeah, I just think freedom is the only way I could describe it. Really, people like something real, something they can actually, an EQ section that you can actually touch, and use your ears, not your eyes. That's kind of how I learned. But it wasn't like I was particularly overly thinking about it in that way. It was just kind of something I gravitated towards naturally, rather than
I think the more stuff that you've got to fiddle with, if you like. So if you're recording on Logic and you've got an EQ that can go anywhere you want, you're going to keep tweaking, and then when you don't have the option to tweak, you have to accept that that's the way something is. And I also think that the pressure to record in a oneer, if you like, is really interesting. When we did your basic track at my place, we did however many takes. I think we'd even settled on a take, and then we did another one, and then the other one became the take that we liked. And I like that fact that we played it 4 or 5 times, and one of those had to be the time. And it affects the way, I mean, as a drummer, I've got a few choices to make in terms of fills and a few things that can vary. Obviously there's a part for the song, but there's areas where I make choices in the moment, and it affects the way that I make those choices because I know that I can't go back on it. It's got to be, it's got to be right all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing it on tape like that, there's an awful lot of preparation that went into my end of making sure that I sort of knew what to expect kind of when we got there. Although I'd not heard you play a single beat, I kind of trusted that you would, get the kind of music that I was making and, be able to, map it out and just go along with it. And yeah, it was great to sort of, just hit record and then listen to it like just back. Like I say, no screen or anything, we're just listening to it back. And I know we're talking about, on a 60s recording podcast, and we're talking about cassette, and I'm aware that I'm not recording with, Studers and it's not 1-inch 4-track, Studer, but it's like you say this a lot in this podcast, and I've started saying it a lot. It's the mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And you can still use that mentality, like I said earlier. It doesn't have to be on tape, but it's a way of recording that sort of has been forgotten in the last what would you say 15, 20 years? Sort of.
I'd have thought so. Yeah, I think that I feel like the last 15 or especially growing up in the industry, through the sort of late 90s and early 2000s, it's almost like I know now looking back, but the records we were listening to is the Loudness Wars and the SSL desks and Pro Tools coming into sort of action. Everybody was excited by these new options, and now we're almost in a regression. So I think that
I think people want to learn how to commit to something a little bit more. That's the whole ethos, is commitment to what you're doing on the 4-track. You're using bounce down techniques, and then you're actually erasing other stuff that you've done before. So you bounce down a guitar, a bass, and a drum onto one track. You've got to be pretty happy with that's how it's going to be, because once you record over those other tracks, they're gone, and you can't at the end of the mix go, I just want to notch that down a little bit, and you can't. You could do it with EQ, try it your best. You could notch the low end off or something, but yeah, it's that's how I like to work. I like to come to the end of a track and put the sliders up, and your finished sounds are pretty much coming out of the speakers already. I think there's this sort of, the way a lot of people do it now, and it is record a bunch of stuff and then sift through it, and I like the arrangement already before I've even pressed record to be worked out.
I agree with you.
All the hard work's done already. It's not just like throw loads of ideas into Pro Tools and then edit it all into something. I'm sure people can make amazing things that way, but God, I couldn't think of anything worse, to be honest.
It's not a fun way to make music, in my opinion. I've done that numerous times with artists that I've had at the studio, and it isn't an enjoyable way to work. I really dislike listening through takes. I have to say that might be a contentious point, but looking down the barrel of 9 take folders or something, you're just thinking, what the heck? The first one that I think sounds great, I'll go with that. That sounds perfect. Something I'm interested in your take on, since learning analog. There's a lot of something that I've kind of discovered is there's a huge amount of nuance. So you're talking about, you mentioned then bounce down techniques and getting it, when you're reducing track counts. Something I've realized is how important the nuance of things like gain structure and all that kind of stuff is. And I certainly didn't appreciate, coming from a sort of digital mindset, how important that is. So when people talk about getting better at recording in terms of an analog sense, what they really mean is just notching up those small percentages of, making sure that your gain structure is exactly right, or the preamps are a level that where the instrument gets where you're getting the best of that instrument. And it's all of those tiny details that you've learned.
Go down a path of doing it all analog, but it actually sounds like crap.
Yeah.
It does not mean better. Absolutely. There's so much myth that comes with the word analog, and everything's just like, oh, it's warm and it sounds this and it sounds that, buzzwords basically. And there's a lot of truth to that, don't get me wrong, but it's like, you can use analog equipment and it just sounds awful, noisy, really noisy. If you're not on it at every single part of your gain structure, like you say, and like if you're bouncing tracks down, and everything has to be done at the right volume, your signal to noise is so important. Otherwise, you're just putting tape noise all over it. Or, if you're using outboard compressors and things like that, they're really noisy if you're not using them properly. And that Pultec style EQ that I've got is also, if you boot, because it's valve and stuff, if you boost them at the high end on it, it can end up really noisy, and you don't want to get to a point where you can't fix that. So you've just got to be at every stage really, really on it.
It was interesting for me when I started making these 2-track sessions that I'm putting out on YouTube, and I sent the first one off to Ben at Draytones to be mastered, and suddenly the noise floor thing hit me like a blooming truck. It was like, because you're just used to being a bit conservative, and suddenly you thought, wow, okay, I need to sort this out, because it was, it sounded cool, but it was noisy. And you can hear it in old recordings. A lot of the Beatles stuff isn't particularly noisy, because that will have been, the White Coats will have got that right. But a lot of the garage recordings, enormously noisy. And
some people like tape noise in a way, but you've got to learn to not have more than you need.
It's a choice, isn't it? Yeah.
Same Revox reel to reel, and if you're not careful with that, it can be noisy. And just being mindful at every stage is something that you don't have to think about digitally. You go into an interface, you go, oh it's about -6, and that'll do, and that's it.
Yeah. What I'd like to get nerdy on gear for a second. So if we just use this track that we've worked on as a good example, because hopefully that's something that will be coming out around the time that this this is put out, so people will be able to go and hear it. So could you talk about the structure of how you recorded it when we were at mine and what was on each channel, and then what happened post, so taking it back to Sheffield and sort of the mix stage and how you overdubbed? Could you talk us through sort of the minutiae of that process?
Okay, yeah. So I'd got a song called Catalina, Don't Be Unkind, which was essentially a piano song. If you on my YouTube channel, I did a live version of it before sort of anything. And yeah, wanted to get involved with musicians, obviously something we've not really been able to do for quite a while. So I got together with my bass player, Will, and basically, yeah, figured out how we're going to do this. And it was around the same time that I'd contacted you about the session. So I'm thinking, let's do it on the 4-track. How am I going to do it? So I did like a mix map basically right at the start. So let's say I'd already written the arrangement. I've done that part. I've figured out how everything goes together, and I'd done various demos of the song, so I know that it works. So we get into the more technical aspect now of, right, how am I going to fit all this onto the 4-track? Now, this is where it gets interesting because there's two sort of sides to this. Well, one I've done on the 4-track, which you've heard already, but actually I'm doing another version on the 8-track now, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about the 4-track one for a start. So yeah, 3 tracks. I was originally going to do bass, drums, and acoustic guitar all live together in the room. And this has all been filmed, by the way. And I'm also hoping by the time this podcast's out on my YouTube channel, there'll be the making of this song video. So all that stuff that I filmed in your studio as well will be in there. So bass, drums, guitar. Happy with the take, get it home. Then bounce that onto 1 track. 3 things onto one with a bit of processing of, I think I compressed the bass and put a bit of the Pultec clone on. I'm talking about this equipment like people know what I've got, but basically I've got some analog outboard. I've got like an 1176 clone, the Clark Technic stuff, which is, just a poor man's kind of, way of getting outboard, but works perfectly, does the job great in home studio, couldn't fault it. Got a spring reverb unit and then a Pultec clone. Using all those processing to get everything sounding finished on the bounce is the most important thing, because that is your foundation for your track. So if you mess that up, the track's not going to sound very good. So we've got the bounce, and then we've got 3 tracks left. Now, I only ever performed 2 bounces, and I never bounced the same thing twice. So then I've done an organ. I've actually done a double track vocal because I had to think about panning. She's very limited with panning. So the let's say track 1 is the bass, the drums, and the guitar, and then track 2 is going to be organ, and then track 3 I did a double track vocal, and I'd already planned to pan this to one side. So doing a double track vocal before the main vocal is kind of strange and a very big commitment. So then I'd bounce those 2 things onto track 2. So then we've got 5 things on 2 tracks. Then that left me 1 main track for lead vocal, and then piano. And then also, while those 2 bounces were happening live at the same time, I'd added some percussion on top of those as well. So that's how you fit a full production on a 4-track. And if you get everything right in terms of your gain staging and all your processing, bear in mind, say on the vocal, I'm record a tape delay on it. The tape delay will be running in real time as I'm recording it. And so from my Revox, that, and this is the way that you think about how you get a finished production when you slide those 4 tracks up. And pretty much everything's done. There's obviously, when you're mixing at the end and you put it through a mixing desk, I use an external mixing desk now as opposed to the one that comes on the board. just because I've got a better mixing desk and I might as well go tape out into it. I can then add in some more reverbs from the spring reverb or a little bit of additional compression if I need it. I've also got a little Joe Meek compressor that I like to patch in if I need some extra control. And then, then mix onto the reel-to-reel. And that was basically how I did the Catalina Don't Be Unkind 4-track version. But there's going to be an 8-track version because I've just bought, literally, as we're recording this 2 days ago, and it's right next to me now, a Tascam 38 half-inch 8-track recorder.
Lovely.
Basically, yeah, a little bit of a whim that was, but I saw one that was fully serviced, fully lined up, could go and test it out and all that sort of stuff, relatively local. So I decided to go for that. And so I'm doing a 2.0 Catalina Don't Be Unkind where I am recording the bass, the drums, and the acoustic guitar from what we did on tracks 1, 2, and 3. Haven't done any bounces on it yet. I've almost got too many tracks. I don't know what to do with them. But, so I'm doing a 2.0 version, and then I'm going to have both versions. I'm hoping the 8-track one will. I mean, you'd like to think that half-inch 8-track's going to have a better sound than the 4-track one. But so that's probably going to be another video where I'm going to compare the two and film. I did it. What I've just talked about on the 4-track. I'm not going to go too much into what I've done on the 8-track because I've literally only just got it and transferred the tracks over and only just started doing overdubs again. Now, because I've done the 4-track stuff, I basically can't, transfer those over into that and then overdub on that. I could do that, but I'd actually done. The only way I made this work is through, the grace of digital. So that's because obviously I'd already recorded over the drums, bass, when acoustic, because I'd bounced them already. So I could have put that into the 8-track, but I wanted the original integrity of the takes to start fresh on another machine. So after we'd done the session, I'd bounced those into my Cubase and then recorded those onto the 8-track. So I've kind of gone off on a tangent about the 8-track, which wasn't how we did it. So I've finished the 4-track one, as you've heard. Mm-hmm. But I've then rethought I want to do another version, and that's sort of what I'm working on at the moment as well.
I think that's really cool. I'm really curious to hear it because I think the 4-track one sounds excellent, and it's been and I'm very curious to see just the sort of subtle differences that it might make, or not so subtle. We just don't know. I'd have to see.
I'm brand new with this machine, so I mean, I can tell you it sounds great, but sometimes when you're recording something, you're doing something that you think sounds great, and then you compare it to something that you thought it was better than, and then you go, it doesn't sound as good. Why doesn't it sound as good? I mean, that's just.
So to sort of start thinking about bringing things to a close, I'm curious if anybody's listening to this and would like to start dipping their toe in the water of an analog world, what would you say was a good starting point based on your experiences?
Definitely getting some sort of Porter studio, I would say. Gets you away from the screen. You don't necessarily have to get a tape one. There's millions of digital ones. So you could still use the same, like say, same sort of approach.
Tascam are still making them, aren't they?
Yeah, you can still use the same approach. If you want to go down the tape route, then definitely do it, but it would be, super mindful. But if you're dipping your toe in the water and you weren't going to, because I've ended up with a studio now that's got like the analog outboard and the tape machines. I've got a mix down deck, the Revox, as I mentioned. We've got the same one that I mix onto. And I wanted to add that if anyone's interested in how I do it, that I've done a lot of videos on my YouTube channel of the process. I've probably done about 8 videos so far, all covering slightly different things. Some of it's remixing old 4-track stuff and going on to the reel-to-reel, which I didn't have the Revox until earlier this year. So I'd always been mixing straight on back into digital. Mm-hmm. obviously it needs to end up digital somehow, because not many people are going to be able to hear it just on my reel. But yeah, so I'm mixing down onto the reel-to-reel as like a finished mix, and that's all part of it. But you don't need to go that far. You don't even need to start off with needing hundreds and thousands of pounds worth of outboard and things like that. You could just get a porch studio. You got no screen and one microphone. But the main thing about recording is everything that happens before you've even put anything into a recorder. It's your environment, it's your instrument, it's what you're actually recording, all that sort of stuff. It's a whole nother podcast on all that sort of thing. The importance of people saying, "Oh, my microphone sounds like crap," but it's like your room actually sounds like crap. There's nothing wrong with the microphone. But like, honestly, I've seen these. I've not used one, but I've seen these little Tascam, like miniature 8-track digital recorders, and they have little built-in digital compressors and reverbs and whatever. And I would imagine you could make some cool little recordings on those using all the mentality of committing to your ideas and things like that. And you don't necessarily, need to have a 4-track cassette. If you specifically want tape, then do that. But there's still ways of working like this with, something that's probably not going to necessarily break down every 5 seconds.
Where is your YouTube channel? Is it? I know I've got it. I subscribed to it, but I can't remember the name of it.
So it's Andy Pick. I mean, if you type in Andy Pickering, it will come up. But it's youtube.com/users/Andy Pick 68 2000, and that's because I've not got enough subscribers to change my original address yet, so I can't change it to the name of my channel. But Andy Pickering Music, I'll be straight away up there. I've got loads of content, right from all the 4-track stuff. I've got a recording breakdowns playlist of everything that I've done, and also all my music's on there as well. We talk about, obviously this is more about the sort of production side and how I got into recording and stuff, but there's a lot of just music on there, and I've also got albums. So it's all from when I go back to the start of this conversation, said when I first got the 4-track in like 2010, I started from that point releasing EPs, pretty much one a year. And also, I've not mentioned the Telmos, which is also my band, which is the same thing, but with musicians. So I'm not doing everything myself, and I wanted to sort of include the guys and not call it the Andy Pickering Band, because just wanted it, and it kind of sounds it's 60s. And just to add, before we run completely over time, I did do the real deal and record at Toe Rag with the Telmos, and that's like, if you're talking real 60s proper recording studio, that's where you go, basically.
I'm pretty sure that's the first conversation that we had was about Toe Rag, and I've been trying to get him on.
That was always a dream of mine, to go and record there, and it was exactly the same sort of thing. We had to be like coming to yours in a way that we were super prepared, and that's, if you want, if you think about a studio like mine, which is, I mean, I think my Revox is from the 60s, and I've got a Philly Corder organ from the 60s, but nothing else is from the 60s that I used. But in Toe Rag, it is the real stuff. I would say that my whole studio is worth probably like the cost of one of his compressors.
I need to get him on to have a chat. We have been in contact, but yeah, I mean, I've spent a long time looking at the website, and then I don't even know if there is a website actually. Now I've said that, maybe that. Anyway, I'm going down another little rabbit hole, but I just need to speak to him because he does seem to be, he's very high up on the list of people that I need to get on this.
I think we basically have come from the same, we've arrived at the same sort of thing with the Beatles. We're massively influenced by the Beatles and how they did it, and they're kind of like a gateway into learning about this recording and how they used to do it and things. And there's millions of other great bands, great producers, but I think Beatles being so accessible, when you get into them and you start finding out a little bit more, that's where you can really start learning about how these records are made, and then sort of trying to do it yourself in your bedroom with some cheap analog gear.
Well, this is it. It feels almost cliche to bring up the Beatles all the time, but it's inescapable. They are the reason for so much of this stuff. They are the reason that I'm doing this podcast. They are at the root of so much of this kind of sort of music and way of making music and everything about it. So yeah,
Well, when I went to Abbey Road, which was when I pretty much just picked up my 4-track, like that, changed my life really. There was two guys that wrote a book called Recording the Beatles.
Yeah.
Two American guys, Kevin Ryan and Brian Kerhew. They did a lecture at Abbey Road, and I went there, bought a ticket, and just to be sat in the room and playing back Beatles records in Studio 2. It was kind of weird actually, because the sound of the room, which is obviously prevalent, particularly in stuff like Please Please Me, coming back through the speakers in the same room, the same reverb coming off the same walls, was a really weird experience, but absolutely like tingling,
Yeah.
Got the goosebumps listening to that and being, stood in the same place. But it was a lot about recording and their echo chamber and their tape machines and the mixing desks and things like that, and got to see all that sort of stuff, and actually ended up snagging myself a Challen piano, the same one as in Abbey Road, which is on all my recordings. I got obsessed with that Challen piano and finally saw one on eBay, and that's a staple in my studio pretty much on every recording.
It's I hope they do those lectures again, because I missed out. We discussed as the Beatles band I work with, we discussed going down all together to go and do it, but these ideas get talked about and we didn't follow through with it. But I'd really like to go back down again.
Yeah, unbelievable place.
So, I was going to say, you post a lot of these videos on your Instagram as well. I know as a sort of IGTV, I think it is, where you can do the longer videos.
Yeah, I feel, your online presence, sometimes you have stuff everywhere, and it's quite hard to sort of get it, all in one place. So, but yeah, so anything that I post on YouTube, I generally post on my Instagram, which is Andy Pickering Music. And also that's kind of like a day-to-day, what I'm up to kind of thing as well. Just pictures of me recording or little reels. I didn't even know what an Instagram reel was until like last week, but stuff like that, just little snippets. If you want to follow me sort of on a more weekly kind of basis, rather than maybe like once a month I might put out a YouTube video on the recording stuff. But
I'm going to link to all this stuff in the show notes so people can find you.
To music, Bandcamp is my main hub for all my releases, which has all the Andy Pickering and Telmo stuff all in one place, which is Andy Pickering Music again. And that's where like you could support me directly by buying my albums and stuff there. But I mean, the Spotify, every kind of streaming platform, I've released all of my EPs and the Telmo stuff all, so like it's not hard to sort of find it in, and it's all the 4-track stuff. I'm hopefully by the time this gets released, I will have just released Catalina Don't Be Unkind, my next EP, with the title track that we recorded at your studio, and hopefully the video will also be out about talking about the processes of that as well. I like to release music and then do a more technical breakdown video for the sort of nerds.
I think a lot of the nerds are listening to this podcast, me included. And that's something that I hopefully we'll get to do some of soon. Is sort of almost remote piano recording, if you like. So I think the two most difficult instruments, arguably, to record are drums and piano. So it seems sensible to have a talented piano player with a collection of nice pianos and an interest in recording like you. So yeah, there's hopefully a project that I've got involving Ron Ryan that we'll be working on. But that's something that you've sort of looked into recently.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've always been figuring out how I can use my skills to sort of do something else that's not just my own songs. And so I've done session work in the past for keyboards people, but we talk about all this analog gear, but then we've got digital setups as well, which enable us to be able to work remotely. I'm doing some composing at the moment for a company in America for like an app. Well, it's like a program / plugin for video makers called Dynascore, which time syncs music to video essentially, and they have you subscribe to that and you get royalty-free library of music, and I'm writing for those, and that's actually for the first time ever given me a full-time job in music. Before that I was just working in a pub. So from there I want to build, and I'd like to get into mixing. If people have done some stuff, they could send me it and I could mix it with all my analog gear, bounce it to tape, or playing keyboards is my main skill. So that's definitely something I have done and would like to do more of. Is people want, anyone ever wants some sort of really dawsy organ or stuff like that? I've got a nice collection of organs, and I've got a real Challen Beatles piano, as well. So, like to sort of get involved with a bit of everything, really.
I think it's great. I think everything you're doing is really exciting, and I feel like I'm relatively new to this sort of world. In the last sort of 5 or 6 years is where my interest in recording has really sort of kicked off. But you've been doing it for a heck of a lot longer, and it's I just think it's really cool that now suddenly there seems to be this buzz of excitement for this style of recording, and you're right there at the forefront of it all.
Well, I mean, yeah, hopefully. It was never a plan. There's no plan with any of this stuff. Like I say, 2010, I bought that bloody karaoke machine, and just with a humble background of doing some stuff on a 4-track with an old band, that was all I had. And I've come this far, now. And if you look at my body of work that I've released, it's mounting up to quite a lot. I think I've done almost 10 records or something. I don't know if it is 10, but I know it's definitely 8, and this might be the 9th. But with the Telmo stuff, I think it's 10. So it's quite a lot.
That's a huge amount. I think getting one album out as an artist is a huge achievement, let alone 10.
Yeah, so that's and it's nice to have that chronological kind of. I can listen to the first one, Crack On. That was essentially just a 4-track and one mic, and a lot of it was recorded post the posh microphones from the university, and I just had this awful mic that I used that I thought was good because it looked really good. It was like a Sony 70s mic for a tape recorder, and it was like big silver thing, like a stereo. It was designed for a Sony cassette corder, they call it. Condenser mic. Honestly sounds awful, but it's all over these recordings that I've done, because right from the start I was just making music with what I got. That's the key. I think the key to this whole conversation is make music with what you've got. And if you have just got one crappy microphone and a tape machine, at the end of the day, you just make it and just do it and get into it, because that's where I started. I can listen to Crack On now, and I can hear the hiss and me recording. Like one of the tracks I recorded accidentally on the lower speed on the 4-track without realizing it, and then I'd finished the track, and then I was like, oh shit, it was on the lower speed, and there's loads of tape hiss on it, and it's on the record, but I don't, I've come a long way since there, is what I'm saying. But it's, if you listen to Crack On and then versus like the stuff I'm doing now, it's like a big journey, of sort of learning this gear, and then now I've got to the point where, ridiculously, I've got 1/2-inch 8-track. My next record will be recorded with that, and then the analog and mixed onto the tape, and I've got this. I didn't even mention my main sort of brain of my studio is the Tascam M30 mixing desk, which is like a nice transformer. It's 1980s, but it's a nice transformer desk, great preamps, really flexible, and I have everything sort of hooked up to that, and I do everything through that now. Even when I'm working on the 4-track, I just use the mixing desk and I just use the tape part of the 4-track now.
It's inspiring. It makes me want to spend some time on eBay. You're a dangerous person to speak to.
It is dangerous, but there's a huge, all the stuff I've got is pretty accessible. You see, the conversation you had with Ben, and I got some of my stuff mastered at Rare-Tone. He's got real gear. Totally different league to what I've got. I'm just, I have got some good stuff, and all together it worked really well, and I know how to use it. And that's the main thing with gear, is knowing how to use it. So even humble sort of, outboard clones that are really designed for the bedroom market, which is what, a price that people like me can afford to buy stuff like that. It doesn't compare to, when you go into somewhere that's got like a compressor or a Fairchild or something that's worth, like, my entire studio. You could spend $4,000 on something, whereas like I've built this up sort of piece by piece at a reasonable price points. But there'd be, it's just learning how to use your gear and, all that sort of stuff. But I didn't want to like people to think that I've got some sort of like, super high end, this is like a poor man's analog studio, but it all works, and there's nothing wrong with any of the gear. It's just, that the prices can get silly, like stupidly silly.
But that's what's inspiring about it all, that it is accessible. That's what
you just got to do it. It's and do the work at the front end, and then what comes out will be great.
Precisely. I couldn't agree more, and that's such a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
There we go. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Andy's such a lovely guy, and he's really passionate about what he does. And as far as I'm concerned, he's tackling a similar problem to me, which is the piano is difficult to record. It's difficult to find a decent piano, find a decent space to record a piano, and it's exactly the same thing with drums. So if that's something that you're interested in, I wholeheartedly recommend Andy. I'd check his website out, andypickering.co.uk. He's also on Instagram at Andy Pickering Music. He's got some really cool videos up there of his process of mixing to 4-track and then mixing also to 8-track now. That will be coming soon on this new single that he's put together. And he has lots of cool videos of detailing the way he sets his studio up and the way he goes about doing the things that he does. And they're really informative and they're really interesting to see sort of firsthand how he does this stuff. So yeah, go and check that out. Next week, I will definitely have my conversation with Ron Ryan. As I said a few weeks ago, it's taken a bit of editing because we had to do it in a few different chunks. But that will definitely be coming next week. Also have quite a few other exciting guests lined up. I'll be chatting in the next few weeks with Joe Kane again, who since our first conversation has released the Poppermost album, which has gone down an absolute storm. Was very cool to see his picture in Shindig magazine. So yeah, if you haven't checked out the Poppermost stuff, definitely go and check that out. So that will be coming in a few weeks' time too. I've had lots of people emailing with suggestions as well. Some of these people are very difficult to get hold of, especially the older engineers who are not on social media. So I'm having to sort of try and weave my way through contacts to see if I can find a way of getting in touch with these people. So yeah, if you do have suggestions, or if you know anybody, or if you have contacts that might be able to help with interview suggestions, then please do get in touch. And also a reminder that if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that by buying one of the mugs, which is on my website, allyouneedisdrums.com. There is a shop there. You can also get in touch with me through the website, or you can email me, joe@allyouneedisdrums. I'm also on Instagram @allyouneedisdrums. I think that's everything. A huge thank you to Joe Kane, David Henshaw, and Rory Hancock for the artwork, the music, and the editing of this podcast. Really appreciate it, and I will be back next week with Ron Ryan. See you then. Goodbye.